So welcome and good morning. My name is Julie Owen, and I'm here today to talk to you about enterprise scheduling and also risk management at Los Angeles Metro. Before I jump into that topic, I thought I would do a bit of a background on myself. I'm a Deputy Executive Officer working in Program Control at Los Angeles Metro. I've been there almost 9 years. I'm served as past president of AACE International 2 years ago. I've got a degree in construction management and an MBA. And I'm a bit of a thrill seeker, so hiked Machu Picchu, love scuba diving. Next on my bucket list, I would love to go dive the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, hopefully. And thank you for the opportunity to be in front of you here today. Now, before I jump into the topic of enterprise scheduling and risk management, I want to give you a little bit of a background about Los Angeles Metro. Anybody in the audience ever been to Los Angeles? Anyone? A few? Okay, great. So Los Angeles Metro, we do everything related to transportation in Los Angeles County. Los Angeles County's got 10 million people. It's the most populated county in the entire United States. It's also got the worst reputation for traffic. And so we cover all of the buses, all of the transit, whether that be bus rapid transit, light rail transit, subways, dial a ride if you're handicapped and you need a ride, carpool vans, anything related to transportation, even bikes now, into bikes as well. Our area is 1,433 square miles in Los Angeles. We cover 89 cities in the county of Los Angeles for all of their transportation needs. So we fund them too if they need to repair streets, street signals, things of that nature. And one of the interesting things about Los Angeles, actually, with Los Angeles Metro, is our organization is involved in capital projects from beginning to end. Now, one other thing to mention about Los Angeles. I absolutely love your transportation system here in London. Oh, it's amazing. One scandal. Anybody like scandals in the audience? Anyone? Anybody ever been to San Francisco? Rode a streetcar in San Francisco? Okay. At one point in time, Los Angeles used to have streetcars everywhere, right? You could get around the city without having a car. However, two companies in the United States, Standard Oil and Goodyear Tire, decided to collude with one another and convinced the state legislature of California that cars were the future in the 50s. So they actually got the city to rip out all of the streetcars. And we went to an automobile economy in California primarily. And interestingly, there was a class action lawsuit a couple of years after that happened. They said not all families are going to be able to afford a car, so they need to have some form of transport. So it was a class action lawsuit, and they actually ended up winning, right? But the unfortunate thing was that the damage was already done. You'd already ripped everything out, right? So starting in the 1980s, we started trying to put everything back in with the hopes of not being a car economy in California all the time. So there was two major initiatives. So actually in the 90s and 2000, we built 1, 2, 3 red line, blue line, green line, gold line. Over a 20-year period, one line at a time. And you guys are saying, no big deal. Hey, we do that for breakfast. No sweat, right? In 2008, we approved a sales tax measure to add $40 billion to add 12 new rail lines in Los Angeles and 16 new highways in the city. And then last year, we had a huge boom before we knew we were going to be the site of the Olympics. We voted in another sales tax measure for $120 billion more. So the bottom line is in Los Angeles right now, there's a lot going on getting ready for the Olympics. In addition to that, now our mayor of Los Angeles right now has said that he wants to build 28 projects and 28 projects by 2028 is the buzzword he's got. So lots of money in LA. Now, why is that unique? Let's show you a little bit over. Here's Los Angeles County, showing where all of our projects are, a lot of our mega projects, and here's 28 of these. We're still trying to figure out which 28 they're going to be. We're going to start to do public-private partnerships in Los Angeles as well to help deliver some of these projects. So they're all over Los Angeles County, spread out quite a bit. And then in order to sell this to the public, and this is actually part of my topic, we created a master schedule in Excel to show the politicians and the public what projects these were going to be and when they were going to happen. This is over a 50-year period. So I always joke to people and say, I want your children and your children's children to come work for me because we're going to have enough projects to keep doing that. But one of the challenges is this ballot measure has been voted in for about a year. And there's already projects that are 3 and 4 years behind based when we prepared this chart a year ago. But then how do I make sure in a dynamic environment of scheduling, trying to communicate information to our stakeholders so they can know when these projects are happening, because we're making all kinds of decisions, financial decisions, staffing decisions, et cetera, borrowing money for some projects, and we need to know what's going on. The sales tax measure shows all of the different categories of money that were collected for this program. That's just that chart. The other thing I'm talking about too is here is our system architecture of the systems that we have called our Program Management Information System. I always joke and say that our information technology guys at work wear red because they're Oracle. Everything in our firm is Oracle. Our HR system, our budgeting system, our asset management system, and now Oracle Primavera products for P6. We've been using Primavera Contract Management. We're moving towards Unifier. We also use Ecosys EPC. And all these systems are then integrated into web-based so we can share information with our public. I don't know when you guys deliver projects over here. This is my first time presenting in the UK. But one of the challenges we have in Los Angeles is if we're collecting taxpayers' money and we're going to be building projects, they want to know what's happening on these projects. What are you doing? How are you spending my money? Is this project on schedule or not? Are you having any challenges? What are the risks? And things of that nature. So we're sharing a lot of that information. We've got a public-facing dashboard that we share to the public, and we've got an internal-facing dashboard for management. So here's our study. Some of the challenges that we had on this particular program as we get started are, 1, sharing schedule information at multiple levels to multiple audiences depending upon their needs and how to do that. And then also managing risks. If I'm delivering a $160 billion program, then the concept of what we used to do previously of doing one project at a time, and then one project at a time, and one project at a time, we need to start thinking about things globally. Some of those things are related to risk management of this program, and what risks happen on every single project, and how can we leverage those programmatically to hopefully improve our project delivery. So with respect to enterprise scheduling, we wanted to make sure we have different modes of transportation, whether or not it be a transit, whether or not be our commuter rail system, our highway system, and each have their own terminology that means things amongst their types of projects. So we had to set standards so that everybody, when they were talking about a phase on a transit project, they were all using the same terminology. We had the same key milestones. And part of the scheduling effort, our organization has 10,000 people. Trying to get everybody to agree across 22 different departments, sometimes a challenge. So making sure everybody agrees, what are the phases, what are the milestones, and then start to, in some cases, teach them how to schedule, because some of the departments didn't. They were more working with the politicians, but they wouldn't really keep track of how they were performing for these schedules. So let's talk about that. So enterprise scheduling, how does it work, right? It's very much a collaborative effort with us and our agency where we're working with our stakeholders and we're working with all the different departments. Our department, which used to be heavily leveraged with both the engineering and the construction group, and it was one situation where we didn't have to go out and beg, the construction department or the engineering department to allow us to put a scheduler to help them. But when I start talking to the safety department, when I start talking to the planning department, for managing some of their environmental projects, the IT department, that those kinds of things weren't necessarily things that they expected. So we started selling our services to other departments to help them manage these projects because, and we've told everybody at our agency, and it's very much true, with all of these projects that are happening, it will completely and utterly transform our agency at every level. I mean, we've done initial staffing predictions, and we anticipate that we will max out. You know, the biggest risk of our process right now is where we're going to find the people to deliver this program. Because we're going to 2.5 times, agency staff. We're going to max out. I hope you guys would love to come to LA and work, because we need people. We're going to max out every consulting firm, every contracting firm. Imagine all this work in the next 10 years to get ready for the Olympics. It's a big deal. So what process we go through for our monthly scheduling, working with all these departments, getting their information, building schedules for them, then teaching them when schedules slip. Because some of them didn't necessarily understand what a variance was. Some of them had slipped 3 years in a year. And they're like, well, that's what it is now. I said, well, understand. But our chief executive officer and our board of directors want to know why. Why did it slip? Is there anything that we can do to fix that? What can we do to accelerate? So training folks, going through a whole quality control process and a QA process to make sure that the data that we're publishing is correct. And we go through a monthly cycle and then also a publisher report to all of our senior leadership team, and then also out to our mayor of Los Angeles so that they know as well. We have multiple levels of schedules in our Primavera P6 database, so excuse me while I talk a little bit tech for a moment. So we have an enterprise scheduling database, P6, and we're utilizing and leveraging that information so that we have the lowest level of detail in our database are the contractor schedules. So we have all contractor schedules in our database. And then we have a middle tier of schedules, which are what we call our controlled schedules. Because we contract, as I mentioned at the beginning, we contract out part of the work, but then also some of it we self-perform. So we buy all of our own real estate. We do a lot. In some cases, we do some of our own design. All of the operations is ourselves. So we need to make sure that we're managing those aspects that we control, as well as looking at what outside contracts we've leveraged, so that we have a middle schedule that's got all of that in one piece. And then we basically roll that up into the next level of schedule, which is a separate file that's level of effort activities and milestones to show management. People that aren't accustomed to reading schedules and wanting to look at lots of activities, we've got that level. So I've got some examples that I'm going to show you here. Actually, one moment. Here are our standard phases for our transit schedules. I told you that we had to standardize so that we had common terminology across our projects and some of our key milestones. And then I kid you not, our CEO has created a little, on his iPad now, he's uploaded all of his schedules to his iPad so that when he goes to an elected official and they're worried about when their project's going to be able to happen or what the status is, he knows, okay, we're in the environmental phase. What year are we going to be done? What do we say we were going to do? Where are we now? So he's heavily engaged in this effort. Here's an example of a level 2 schedule. In this case, I'm looking at the environmental phase activities and also the engineering phase. So I can see the detailed activities that my planning department is working on. This is a state environmental exercise. So we can show the different stages that they go through of looking at alternatives, doing a draft environmental document, doing a final environmental document, and then also key milestones. But when I roll that up to the summary schedule, you can see that there's only a couple of bars here, and I'm going to try not to fall off the stage here because I am that clumsy. Alternatives analysis, instead of showing several different activities, it's a level of effort activity that's showing the overall period of that duration instead of the detail and some of the milestones, right? And then when I roll it up to the executive level, here's looking at many different projects and then looking at them sorted by phase. But you can start to see the legend at the bottom. So this is an idea, I mentioned before that our master schedule we did before was in Excel. And you had to manually draw all those phases, and when things was changing, it was kind of a pain in the rear. Now P6 is drawing this for us as we manage our schedules and things move automatically. And then we're doing variance reporting also. So this is an example of a report that we give to our executives, because many of these different departments are making staffing decisions or buy decisions, or when are all the procurements coming, so when my procurement department can know when they need to hire contract administrators, et cetera. So heavily use of these schedules. Then in addition, on our highway program, it's kind of lather, rinse, repeat. The only challenge is that in our highway program, they like to build things in pieces. So you go out and build pieces of the road and contract that out separately. Most of our projects are design build in the transit world. On the highway side, they're design bid build. That's the way we deliver those there. Now, that's the end of scheduling for a moment, talking about enterprise scheduling. Now let's talk about risk. Risk. Whoever here's ever been through an audit? Anyone? Anyone? Okay. There was a construction best practice audit that happened at our agency. They came up with 395 findings. Oops. And of those findings, many of them were, I guess, duplicative, honestly. So we watered them down or sorted them and found out some of them were related to risk. And one of the major comments that they had related to risk is they said, you guys do it, well, actually, anybody here from transportation organizations, anyone? Okay, great. So then maybe I'll speak your language for a second. In the United States, if you're doing a transit project, the federal U.S. government entity that you deal with is called the Federal Transit Administration. Not sure what that is in the UK. I'm imagining you have something similar. And the Federal Transit Administration in the United States, when they're going to give money to a project, they have many stipulations regarding how you get that money. One of them is related to risk management, right? So anytime that we get federal money, and we get federal money, I mentioned we had, at one point in time, 12 major transit projects. 3 of those had federal money, right? And the feds have created this very prescriptive risk management program where they even define contingency levels for you. And they say at each phase gate, you need to have, X% contingency. So they define contingency levels for cost, they define contingency levels for schedule, right? And then they also have a project management oversight contractor that they pay for that you go through reviews along every gate or stage gate review that you have, and then also every month. Now I mentioned that as the backdrop, because imagine that for a moment, and imagine the 3 projects that we have that are meeting with these folks and doing risk workshops and risk reviews, and they've got contingency levels, and the feds are looking at your contingency levels and your budget, and if you're not within that level, they basically what they tell us is they say, if your project's too risky, I don't want to put my money in there because I don't want to get a black eye. You're obviously not prepared, you don't know what you're doing, so find the money yourself. So that drives a level of rigor in our risk management process for these projects. So what the auditors said is they said, you do a really good job on federal projects because we have to, right? But what about the rest of them? What about the rest of your transit projects? You've got some overruns that are happening in there, and you're not really looking at risk. You're not doing risk workshops. You're not looking at levels of contingency and whether or not they comply with that program or not. So what they said is we needed to have a risk culture for our program for all projects, right? Makes sense. They also said that we needed to have a gate review program. Although the federal projects had a defined gate review program they had to go through before they can move to the next phase, some projects didn't. They could come up with a budget and off they go, and they get into trouble. And one of the biggest challenges, I don't know in your government or your organizations, but our CEO, our Chief Executive Officer, is very, very, very concerned about relationship management. Relationship management with our board of directors, relationship management with the public, because he wants to make sure that when somebody says Los Angeles Metro and they're out in the public, you know, or whatever venue, that people go, those guys are good. So he wants to ingrain in us always under promise and over deliver, right? So that you're always a hero. So if we get into trouble at some point in the future and we need to go back and ask for money or something, that we're the heroes and, you know, we get help as opposed to vice versa. So having a situation where projects were going out possibly half-baked is not in the best interest of relationship management, right? So we wanted to implement a readiness review process across our project lifecycle and then have risk management on all of our projects. Now, maybe not the full detailed federal process that you have to go through for a smaller project, but some sort of a subset for that. And then also trying to make sure that we had a auditing body. We're hiring a deputy executive officer of risk management to look at a program, have a program to implement for all of our projects, and then start to do reviews to make sure that those actual processes and procedures are being followed. Now, opportunities. That was one of the huge opportunities. They hired that person. Now we're trying to make sure that we have a uniform risk management process, because one of the challenges we had was we would hire different consultants to help us in our risk management program on these big projects, but each one was doing things a little bit, they might be going through a risk workshop, you know, on those projects. You start to try and compare the information, and it's a slightly different flavor across these different consultants. And if I want to try and leverage some of that information so I can start to look at things programmatically instead of project by project, then there need to be some standards across those. So we established a centralized web-based system, and we're really excited about the concept to be able to look at some of this information programmatically to start to make strategic decisions. So in order to do that, we had anybody, WSP folks in the audience? WSP? No? Okay. Formerly Parsons Brinkerhoff, I guess. They were a subject matter expert on one of our federal projects. So when we were trying to figure out a standard, we don't necessarily know everything. We went to them and we said, okay, you guys are experts on Federal Transit Administration projects. We're trying to create a standard for all transit projects, and we would like you to come up with what data we need to track. So they identified all of the fields. Then we put this information into Primavera P6, P6 Web, right? How to map the information. And then further, one of the challenges that we had is Parsons Brinkerhoff had been working on our projects for 6 years, and they'd been putting all of this information into an access database for 2 projects that they were working on. 2 out of the 3 that I mentioned were federally funded. But we wanted to leverage all that information for the history because we've got all of these projects that are going to be coming, and can't we take the past benefit of the 5 years of those projects and then leverage some of that information and looking towards the future? So we wanted to get that information into P6. We used the risk management functionality that is native in P6, but then we also augmented that with user-defined fields that were specific information that the Federal Transit Administration wanted to see. I'll show you in just a moment. And then we scripted to get all of that data into P6. One of the other things that was very important that we wanted to be able to see, especially on some of our projects, because okay, if I've got 5 years, maybe I want to know how one risk changed from the very beginning to where I am now. So we wanted to have the ability to see snapshots. So I could do comparative analysis to see if, from a trending perspective, right? Is there a trend that keeps happening on these projects over and over from beginning or end that I can start to use for predictive analysis? Another thing they wanted to do, as you can imagine, in a live database, some of the managers were concerned, who's going to see this? Because if I'm, opening the kimono, so to speak, and I'm showing all my risks, maybe some of those risks we're, hypothetically talking about, and I don't want to let the CEO see that right now. So we had a publish feature that we put in there to make sure that we could go through our monthly process on these projects, and then we would publish the data so that there wouldn't be any risk of information getting out that we weren't really comfortable with. We did do dictionaries to make sure that we had better data quality. And then the other thing we did too, because there was lots of comments, and we wanted to be able to see the history of how comments change from month to month over time. So we automated a process where I have this month's comments, and when I start the risk workshop for the month or risk analysis for the month, it automatically moves this month's comments to last month's, and I can keep these updated, and I have a whole audit trail of what's going on. So now let's see what it looks like, right? Giving you a little bit of examples here. So here's an example of a sample risk register showing different filters. Risk ID, a unique ID for each project, description, what type of risk it is. These are identified by the Federal Transit Administration categories that we're supposed to look at. Federal Transit Administration also identifies that, if you can see this pull down here, at each of these milestones, I have to define risk of what's happening on the project. So we've got that. And then we also have a standard cost tracking system called a standard cost category, because the Federal Transit Administration loads all of their budgets by line item, so they can compare costs in one part of the country to another part of the country, how these transit projects, how are subways in the East Coast of the United States compared to the West Coast, or et cetera. So we got to keep track of all that information, as well as risks also. Who owns the risk, et cetera. So that's showing our risk register. Now, getting the data in, right? We have a couple of wizard-based screens that we put the information in. So this is an example of one going over the overview and who owns the risk, what's the mitigation strategy, et cetera, what's the standard cost category, et cetera. Then I get into my assessment and my scoring. So we have a standard scoring matrix too that we use for our transit projects. And that was mostly mode-based too, to have some similarities there as well. And let's see. Okay, mitigation and action plans. The ability to identify multiple mitigations if I wanted to as well. Obviously at least one. And then who is going to mitigate? What's the status of that mitigation? What's the due date for that mitigation? Because we're running a lot of reports as we update these risks and track them over time. And then finally, the justifications, right? This is where we're copying and pasting automated. I was talking about a moment ago. So what's the justification, and what's the review of the risk? So once you get all of the data in, here's an example of one single risk in our database. So, all the information from the wizard showing up on one page. So then I have the ability now to data mine, right? Everything in a single database. That's our risk process, right? And you guys are like, so what, right? What did we learn? What did we learn? Well, on the scheduling side, some of the lessons learned that we've got are we're doing really well on our transit side because we already assign bodies, project controls bodies, to work on those projects, so we don't have to beg project managers. Schedules exist there. Nobody's delivering a project without a schedule. My highway department still schedules in Excel. It's not the same for all of the groups, right? So you're constantly trying to sell your services, and then also you're dealing with people that don't want to share information. So trying to expand scheduling beyond the transit group into other groups. The commuter rail group, the transit group, very mature, good. Our highway group, still learning. And then further, our planning group, we're doing a lot of environmental projects. I don't know about you guys for environmental projects, but sometimes our environmental process can take 7 years. 7 years. Imagine I've got to be ready for the Olympics in 10 years, and they're trying to tell me I got a 7-year environmental process. That's not going to work, right? So trying to get those folks to, because again, they're not schedule driven, and they're very public and politically driven. So as an example, I was talking about some projects that have slipped. they go and decide to do a technical study for 2.5 years to vet this particular project. Well, now my schedule is 2.5 years late. Did you need to do that technical study? Right? Do you realize that you just slipped the schedule 2.5 years? Right? So we're working with these folks to let them know what actions and what consequences, especially when we've got a mayor that is heavily, I think he's going to be going for a political office somewhere else. So he's gunning for this 28 by 28 for the Olympics and possibly the governor of California, or maybe replace Trump, I hope. So that'll be the extent of my political comments for today. So anyways, scheduling, expanding scheduling across multiple projects, and then further, trying to make sure, if we've got all these schedules, one of the things that I thought would be really great to do would be, I talked about staffing as our biggest challenge. It's our biggest risk, is where all these people are going to come from. Well, why not resource load some of these schedules with some of the roles or categories of the kind of people, and then look at how many of that particular kind of person am I going to need over time, right? Not rocket science. Possibly that would be an opportunity that we could do. And then also having different I talked about the CEO dashboard that he's got that we're trying to upload to, so more analytics. Now, from a risk management perspective, I talked about the Federal Transit Administration and some of the requirements, and that WSP architected our risk system that we've got, which is wonderful, right? Except it's transit-based. What about highway? What about regional rail? What about the rest of the projects? If I'm using terminology that the Transit Administration understands, but the Highway Administration doesn't understand, I'm going to have to figure out how to expand that so that it's not just a subset of projects, right? So that's one of the things that we're hoping to do, is to expand that risk process to look at more, at all capital projects. So maybe there's a way that we look at smaller projects at some modified scale versus bigger projects by mode, et cetera. And then we really, really, really want to be able to start to look at some of these risks programmatically. Because some of these areas are huge, that if we could prove to our executives that these are risks at the program level, then they may decide to put some money to possibly mitigate that. Maybe I need to do a bulk buy for vehicles across multiple projects. Maybe I need to hire a third-party administrator to come and work with some of these utilities across at the program level instead of project by project by project. Because one of the challenges that we've had is we've got this mentality that we've been doing project, trying to get people to pop up and look up and think of things at the program level as opposed to being buried in the project level, has been somewhat of a challenge. It has. So, but I believe that we're moving in that right direction, because we have to. We have to. So those are some of the lessons learned that we've learned. I believe I'm good on time. So if anybody has any questions or such, I'd be happy to entertain some.
What about the protection?
I'm sorry?
Protection from risks.
Protection from
Once
risks?
you define risks, how do you protect the project from risks? I mean, do you put contingency? Do you put something in the cost? Do you put money somewhere? You say, I identify the risks. I identify the treatment action, mitigation action. I know now I have that each risk has some probability and some effect, minimum, most likely maximum. At the end of the story, how the project is protected from risks.
We have risk-based contingencies.
You have risk-based contingency,
Correct.
which is one for each risk, or is it a total one?
Both. Both.
Thank you so much.
So, and then the Federal Transit Administration, when they're looking at our risk register, because again, I mentioned that particular, in all of our policies and procedures at our agency, in our transit mode, are based on the FTA standard. And the FTA standard says that when I'm in preliminary engineering, I must have 30% contingency. And what's interesting about the FTA, what they did is they went and they did an analytical model of 100 different projects across the United States, and they looked at cost estimates across different phases. And they had contingency at each of those phases, and they basically modeled what would a good project look like. And now they evaluate projects against that. So at preliminary engineering, I'm supposed to have 30% contingency. So when I submit, I've gone through my risk workshop, and I submit that information to the project management oversight contractor. They start to evaluate those things of what are our highest risks? Have we allocated contingency for those? So we'll have allocated and unallocated contingency. So, it's not uncommon for our projects to have a healthy contingency. And again, under promise, over deliver, right? So we bury too in our schedules, by the way, the federal standard in the United States for FTA is that 20% of the duration from the start of final design to when I put that asset in service should be contingency, scheduled contingency that I draw down over time based on the risk, right? So that way our projects aren't late, right? They're not late. You've got enough contingency to be able to manage the program. There's a whole policy and procedure related to when I take money out of contingency and how I put it into different line items. The whole audit trail as to that, how I'm communicating that. And again, the Federal Transit Administration, they don't want to have a black eye. They don't want to give money to bad projects. It politically damages them as well. So they watch that very closely. And that's not to say that they never have problem projects. Honolulu. Great example. So thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions after, I'd be happy to answer them, but I want to make sure we stay on schedule. Thank you.